All right. Well, welcome everyone to our final UEB webinar. Thank you for joining us through essentially 6 of them. A lot of you have been there since the first set of UEB webinars. So we appreciate you joining us on a Friday afternoon of all days to go through the last of the UEB webinar with us. And today we're going to be primarily talking about the decision making between UEB and Nemeth. We've gone over the code changes, and we've gone over UEB with Nemeth. We've gone over UEB for math. So now I know everybody's kind of like, well, what do I teach? So we're going to attempt to address that issue with you today and hopefully help provide you some guidance. The opening code for in-service credit today is implementation. implementation, implementation. There won't be any practice today, so you will not actually need your Braillers, but there will be a homework assignment that we will go over once we get into the webinar. And so we're going to talk about UEB implementation across the nation, here in your backyard, what it's looking like in Florida right now, and then to make the decision and give you some more resources. One thing I want you guys to be aware of is there are a lot of downloads in the files pod, and so go ahead and start downloading these files. There's a lot of good resources, some that will guide you when you're transcribing UEB, and some that will guide you when you're transcribing UEB with Nemeth. But there was one we wanted to point out, and I believe it was the
Hitchhiker's Guide.
The Hitchhiker's Guide, Kathy is telling me. There is an error in there. Do we know where that error is in particular, Kathy?
I don't. It was during a workshop. They were discussing it, and someone pointed something out and mentioned that there was an error, but I don't know.
Okay.
So just be aware there might be something, and you might catch an error.
And if you catch it, kiss your brain. That'd be kind of awesome. Okay, so without further ado, I think I'm going to hand this over to Kathy, and we will get started with the meat of our discussion today. All right, Kathy?
All right, thank you. Well, first of all, I wanted to kind of say, I think I know what you all want to hear today, because it would be what I want to hear today. And that is, okay, everybody teach Nemeth. Or, okay, everybody teach UEB, period. It would be so nice and clean and simple if it was like that. However, the situation is not always that simple right now. And in our country, in our state, that's the case. So hopefully the information we're going to share with you today will help give you some guidance. Also, I wanted to make a disclaimer to let you know we do not consider one code better than another. Okay, we're not here to promote one or the other. Just kind of like Coke versus Pepsi or Windows versus Mac. There are lots of opinions as well as pros and cons to both UEB and UEB with Nemeth. Both can represent math and technical material at all grade levels. And until we have good research on both codes, we have to just do the best we can to make the right decision for each student. And hopefully today will help you with making future decisions until we can get until more guidance becomes available. So, starting with that, I wanted to start with the press release. This is the one from 2015. And so BANA met again. They had met in November of 2014 and released the initial press release. And this is another one. They got back together. And so they had a lengthy and in-depth discussions over several days. And I'm sure a lot of people were bringing up the issue of, okay, well, so we're going to have math books in 2 different codes and things like that. So they got together and they talked about it, and then they decided on another press release. And you can look at the full press release with the website at the bottom. So next slide. Okay, and so what they decided is that that they recognize and appreciate the genuine concerns from the Braille community regarding the transition to Unified English Braille. That they stand by their original motion to adopt UEB as a complete code, as well as the implementation statement issued in 2014, in which they expressed that Nemeth Code remains integral to Braille in the United States. And then the board of BANA could not reach consensus regarding establishment of a single code for technical materials for Braille in the United States. And so the decision to use UEB or the Nemeth Code with UEB context for technical materials should be made based on Braille readers' individual needs. Now, some things I wanted to point out about this. Note that UEB as a complete code was accepted. This means including using it for math if the person wants to do that. There is some misconceptions out there. In preparing the webinar, I was looking online, trying to find different things, see if there was anything new out there about UEB versus Nemeth. And I ran across some interesting opinions and stuff. But the original press release in 2014 did make it sound like UEB was for literary and Nemeth was for math and science. And I know it was around this release that was the last time we met as a group. The Vision Leadership met as a group, and that's where some of you were saying, well, I thought we're supposed to teach Nemeth. At that time, that's what we thought BANA was saying, that Nemeth was the standard for math, and so that's what the opinion was, or that was what we were going with. And that was decided with the knowledge we had at that point. Also notice that they couldn't reach consensus. So they obviously talked about it for quite some time. So they're aware of the issues and the complications. I think everybody is. But there wasn't a way to resolve that. And so we are continuing both codes. So everyone's concerned about the logistics of two codes for technical materials. But that has to be the reality for the moment. And the next slides, we're going to kind of address why.
And there's lots, like Kathy was saying, if you Google UEB versus Nemeth, I mean, there are tons of discussion threads and boards addressing that very question. And there's definitely people on both sides of the camp that feel very strongly and opinionated about each of those codes.
But just to emphasize, like Dr. DAndrea was mentioning, UEB was accepted as a complete code, meaning you could use it for math if that's best for the student. Okay, so in this slide, I wanted to put this in here. These are the full members on the BANA board. These are the folks deciding, the organizations that volunteer their time and send representatives to make these decisions. Now, I put the ones in blue are the ones that I think most likely would have teachers of the visually impaired involved with it. So there are teachers of the visually impaired, but you can see it's not all teachers. And one thing that I remember Dr. DAndrea and Dr. Holbrook saying when they were presenting at the Working with the Experts, UEB and UEB with Nemeth, is that it would be inappropriate for non-teacher organizations to mandate how and what we should teach. And that's another reason for BANA's decision in them doing things the way they did. Because there's a lot of organizations involved that aren't in the teaching field, aren't in the teaching arena, and don't have that background. And that's probably also a reason why they couldn't come to consensus on a single code. Okay, so the Council of Chief State School Officers, CCSSO, worked with BANA to conduct the national survey to collect information from each state about their plans for the transition to UEB. And this was a survey that was done and sent out early in 2014. So we're backtracking a little bit, but this is kind of how they came to this decision with the press release. Okay, so they sent out the survey. 32 states completed the survey in November of 2014. And we're going to look into the results. You can get this actual, they took the survey and turned it into an Unified English Braille Implementation Guide. And you've got the website. You can go and download it if you're interested. And I found it was interesting. There was one state that reported being unfamiliar with UEB at that time.
A little scary.
Okay, so the states that responded, because I like to know who responded and who didn't. So you've got a list here of all the states that responded. The ones in bold, so California, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, Ohio, Oregon, South Carolina, Washington, Nebraska, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and Minnesota, all of those states now have official plans posted on the web, either within BANA's website or Arizona. Arizona has a UEB website as well, and they have some that BANA didn't have. So I wanted to point that out. But my big question with this one was, what about the other 17 states? What's going on with them? So, and I wanted to know who they were. So Alabama, Georgia, Illinois, Iowa, Maryland, Mississippi, Montana, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Texas, and Vermont. All of them didn't respond. Now, the good thing out of that, Texas and Maryland, from that list, they have established plans listed on the internet as well. So at least we know they know about it and are doing something and thinking about it. But yeah, it's interesting that nothing has been heard of from the other states. Okay, so with the survey, they had 4 brief sections to collect information, and it was related to basic demographics, like how many students use Braille in the state, the preparation of instructional materials, their test preparation, and how they were going to train personnel in UEB. All right, so one of the things that BANA found out when they did this survey, and I think they had a different idea of how this whole implementation was going to go until they did this survey, and I think this opened their eyes and were like, wait a minute, is that all states are doing things very differently, and sometimes there's differences just even within a state of how things are done. Other issues I've heard discussed in various workshops, well, and we can go to the next slide, was things like, well, I'll read this first and then we'll go back. About 20 states have a state text adoption list. We're one of those that schools use, but in other states without the system, local districts or even individual schools are free to choose whatever textbooks they want, which I'm glad we're in a textbook adoption state, because that would be a pretty scary situation. And then 27 states have a centralized instructional material center, like us, that provide Braille educational materials, while other states without the system put the responsibility onto the schools to obtain Braille materials from American Printing House for the Blind and other similar countries. One of the things I wanted to note, issues that I have heard brought up in other workshops, was that like one state just adopted new textbooks. And so they had them created in Nemeth with EBAE, and right now they cannot afford to transition into the new code. And some states require certified transcribers to produce textbooks, and so until transcribers are certified in UEB, they can't produce textbooks in that state. That affects some other states. And there's a waiting list for materials for EBAE certified transcribers to become certified in UEB. They can't get that letter of endorsement until they can get the test, and I know some of the visual aid volunteers of Florida are on a waiting list to get the materials to do that.
Yeah, and I see, not to interrupt the flow, but Carol's on here from Pinellas. And Carol, had you signed up to take the new certification exam? We'll see if she responds, but go ahead. I'll be curious, Carol, if you've heard anything or if there's any updates on that.
Okay. So, given all those differences and everything else, next slide. So in light of all the differences of each state's needs, BANA's been encouraging each state to develop their own individual UEB transition plans or implementation plans that align with the national implementation date, but also meet the unique needs of each state. There wasn't going to be a one-size-fits-all in this situation. Okay. So another question they asked, and what we really focused on for this, because we're talking about math with UEB or math with UEB and Nemeth, was how does your state plan to provide textbooks for mathematics and science? And the vast majority of the respondents wrote comments of other, because they did have like a multiple choice, but most wanted to write in their own responses. And so a summary of this and the results were that states that both UEB and Nemeth would be produced for textbooks for math and science, at least for now. There was 10 of them. It included us, Colorado, Delaware, Kentucky, Louisiana, North Carolina, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Dakota. And I found it interesting that this implementation guide noted that there was one state considering moving to UEB only. There's 6 states that plan to do Nemeth only. That include California, Michigan, Missouri, South Carolina, Washington, and Wisconsin. Some states that weren't sure, they probably were going to do Nemeth, or at least just Nemeth for now, was Nebraska and West Virginia. And then those that didn't know that responded included Alaska, Arkansas, Connecticut, Hawaii, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Massachusetts, Maine, North Dakota, Virginia, Utah, and Wyoming. Now, of those, and I'm not sure which ones, 3 noted that it was a local decision. So all materials were decided at the local level. And then 1 state didn't give a response for this particular question. Okay, so the question of code or codes, UEB or UEB with Nemeth, to use for math and science materials impacts not only the production of educational materials and assessments, but also the instruction of students, and we know this. Educational teams need to evaluate factors individual to each student in relation to the student's progress in math. And there's a need for the U.S. to conduct research to explore the outcomes for students who use UEB for math and science. It really comes down to we need research on both codes on how that impacts students' performance in math and science. And a quote that I found interesting and very applicable is, this is a national conversation that will need to take place over the next few years. So if you feel like, you're hearing lots of different things and things are unsettled and that kind of thing, welcome to the club, because that's the state of the entire nation.
Yes.
Okay, so now that we've covered the national focus, just a reminder, we've talked about this before, but the current status and implementation in Florida. There is a committee that's worked on the Florida implementation plan. There have been meetings recently within the Department of Education as well as with Bureau of K-12 Assessment. We may be waiting to see and hear how SAT and ACT is planning to do things, and use that as a guide, because we're a college and career readiness skill. And the last that I heard about SAT is they were beginning to discuss it, but they had not made a decision. But hopefully, sometime soon we'll have an official implementation plan in Florida, and that may or may not change how things are going and what we do. All right, as it stands now, it is an individual education program IEP team decision regarding when the new code will be taught and which code will be taught, whether it'll be UEB or UEB with Nemeth. UEB instead of EBAE, though, should be taught to all beginning Braille readers of any age, because as of now, EBA is no longer an official code in the U.S. Okay, the 2015-16 statewide assessments, which we're coming right up on, will only be given in EBAE and EBAE with Nemeth, but it will be offered in contracted and uncontracted Braille. Again, our best guess, and it's just a guess, is that statewide assessments will be doing UEB in about 2017-2018 school year. But there's still a lot to be discussed before final decisions are made. And once we get the official implementation plan for Florida, that will impact everything. Okay, statewide assessments, however, should not determine the specialized instruction needs of your student. You need to, as is good practice, keep data and monitor progress. Do your functional vision learning media assessments every year. Show that your student has been instructed in UEB. If your student does not do well in the statewide assessments in EBAE and you have data to show that it's due to the Braille code, not the student's knowledge of the content of the statewide assessments, then you can apply for a waiver. But remember that a waiver waives the scores. The student is still going to have to take the test in the EBAE code.
Yeah, if you want to make sure that you're showing, yes, I instructed my student in Unified English Braille, and saying they've been successful in class, look, they have all A's or B's, and they've been scoring well on all the chapter tests and all the interim tests in that class, and if then they bomb the actual statewide assessment, then you have to show, well, no, they actually did really well. This has to be related to the code.
All right. As regarding textbooks that we produce at Florida Instructional Material Center, all new adoptions of non-technical material will be transcribed in UEB. Teachers, you now have the option of ordering books in EBAE, EBAE with Nemeth, UEB, or UEB with Nemeth. But note and remember that if you order a book in UEB or UEB with Nemeth, likely it's going to take longer to receive because it'll be a special request and an initial transcription. And you're going to want to get those in as soon as possible, which I know I've worked at all levels. I know how hard that is. I know that schedules sometimes don't even get set for students in the high school level until the summer. I get it, but get them in as soon as you possibly can. And then EBAE, but an EBAE book or EBAE with Nemeth may be available right away for shipment.
So, yeah, we might have that book sitting on our shelf that's an EBAE or EBAE with Nemeth, and you'll have to make a decision if that's something you want your student to have immediate access to, especially if they've been learning both codes.
So, getting into the meat of today, UEB or UEB with Nemeth making the decision. Okay, the biggest thing is determining the student's level of functioning. The most important focus needs to be on how the student is doing in math and science regarding conceptual understanding, and it's not just about the code. And we need to remember, look into how does the code help support learning the concepts in math and science. And this is where we really need data collection and research as well. And just a note too, if a student is not succeeding with Nemeth, you need to make sure you investigate as to why. And this would go for UEB as well. Is it the student needs more practice and instruction in Nemeth? Is it the vision teacher's skills aren't as strong to give enough practice and instruction in Nemeth? Or is learning the two codes proving difficult for that particular student? Don't just assume that it's a code problem. You really want to dig down and evaluate and assess to make sure that there's not another reason, so that you really identify the problem and can fix the problem. Okay, so when we had the Working with the Experts with Dr. DAndrea and Dr. Holbrook, one of the things that they shared with us was developed by the Indiana UEB Implementation Subcommittee. And this is a Nemeth or UEB Factors and Considerations for Technical Code, and you can download this. So this document is intended to assist teachers of the visually impaired by giving factors to consider and discuss during a student's individual education program meeting to recommend and decide the most appropriate Braille code for instruction in math and science subjects. And the idea behind this one was that you didn't want to just go in there of, well, it's my opinion they should do this, or it's my opinion they should do that. They tried to have some kind of concrete written information that'll give you some backup. But remember, there is only anecdotal research on Nemeth, and the UEB research has concentrated on the readability of UEB for technical materials, not on which type of students do better in math using which codes. So until we have research into questions like this, we can only do the best we can with the available information and resources. All right, so in this handout, you'll see they do kind of a pros and cons with UEB and Nemeth, and it's set in a little different format. But to present the information, I tried to reorganize it a little bit and share it through the PowerPoint slides. So it identified the several factors that would affect this decision: instruction, eye conditions, prognosis, and age of onset, cognitive ability, interests and aptitude, Braille skills, and other. And we're going to get into each one of these. So for instruction, some of the things they wanted to consider is previous instruction in the area of math. What were they using before? Current familiarity with math symbols. Are they familiar with UEB and/or are they familiar with Nemeth? And ongoing instruction in code introduction.
Hold on, before we go any further, which handout is this? Let's see. The UEB Guide for Educational Teams?
No, it's the Nemeth UEB Factors, I believe.
So in your file pod, if you want to download this one so you can follow along on the actual sheet, UEB Braille for Math.
No, UEB Nemeth UEB factors.
There it is. Okay. Nemeth UEB factors _ consideration. That's the file you want that she's referring to. Okay, sorry. Continue.
Okay, so we're still inside instruction, and so in thinking about UEB for math for these students, all the symbols are the same, so you only need to teach one code for literary and math science. Also, which the one good thing about that is that would free you, instead of having to teach two codes, it would give you extra time to teach other things. And then if a student has been confused by two separate Braille symbols standing for one print symbol, then that particular student may benefit from UEB for math. Okay. And then with the Nemeth, if instruction has been in Nemeth, most likely you're going to stay with Nemeth and just stay with it through graduation. Unless there's a problem with it, there's no need to change. If there's no difficulty having two separate Braille symbols standing for one print symbol, then that student might benefit from instruction in Nemeth Code. Okay. Getting to the second area, eye conditions, prognosis, and age of onset. Some of the things it noted was the eye condition, including prognosis and stability, the age of onset of the visual impairment, which we all know that makes a big difference in what you're going to do, and the transition from visual math to tactual math. Some considerations before getting into kind of the pros and cons of each code, they had some considerations, and they talked about currently there's no research to suggest preference for UEB or UEB with Nemeth Code based solely on a student's eye condition, prognosis, or stability. However, the determination of Braille as a consideration does depend on these factors. So there's not a direct tie to a certain eye condition or anything like that, but the information about the prognosis and the stability and all that does affect the decision. And the age of onset will affect a student's previous functioning in math as well as the instruction needed with new vision loss in all the areas of expanded core curriculum. Because especially if they're an older student and they just lost their vision, you have so much to teach them in very little time. Okay, so considerations for UEB. If transitioning from visual to tactual math, UEB may be preferred because it more closely follows print with a single symbol being used regardless of the context, literary or math. And then a consideration for UEB with Nemeth Code would be if transitioning from visual to tactual math, Nemeth Code may be preferred because it is more streamlined, requiring fewer cells, and therefore able to convey math concepts concisely and efficiently. Okay, cognitive ability. The current academic skills of the student, math ability including achievement in math concepts, ability to think critically, and supports needed to acquire and process new skills and learn Braille symbols in a variety of contexts, literary, math, or science materials. The considerations here, they noted currently that there's no research to support that a student's cognitive ability has an impact on the code that he or she will use to access mathematics or other technical materials. For UEB considerations, if the simplicity of using the same Braille symbols across all content areas would be beneficial for your student, then UEB may be the favorable option. If math symbols in UEB are routinely encountered, it may be beneficial to give math instruction in UEB if instructional strategies can be incorporated into the literary reading materials. And for Nemeth, with this, the Nemeth considerations, if the consistency of Braille symbols is not needed, if it's not a problem, then Nemeth Code might be beneficial. If instruction in both code and math concepts can be provided simultaneously and the student has no problem learning both at once, Nemeth Code may be beneficial. Okay, interests and aptitude. An interest in STEM, so your science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, aptitude in STEM subjects, and future aspirations regarding post-secondary education and career. And this part I just took a direct quote. They said considerations. Research by Holbrook and McCuskey, Cryer, Home, and Morley-Wilkins, 2013, and anecdotal evidence from other English-speaking countries using UEB suggests that the code used for representing materials in technical fields is less important, regardless of which code you're using. It's less important than instruction in the subject matter concepts. So the biggest thing you need to be concerned about is your student getting those math concepts? And then a secondary is, okay, which code is going to allow them to gain those concepts best for that individual student?
What's going to help them learn more efficiently and effectively in the classroom? What's going to provide that access?
So, UEB considerations in this area: if there's a high interest in STEM subjects, UEB may be beneficial if the educational team determines that consistency of using a symbol for print symbols across subject texts would support building foundational STEM concepts. And the UEB with Nemeth considerations: if there's a high level of interest in STEM subjects, Nemeth Code may be beneficial given its traditional use in these areas and the availability of new and classic texts which have already been translated into Nemeth. And then Nemeth is more streamlined and therefore requires fewer cells, which will impact writing for math and other STEM areas. And on the next few slides, we're going to take a look at a comparison of UEB and UEB with Nemeth, just to kind of see that streamlined and, you know, how much more is it really? So with that, our first example, and it had to go into 3 slides because it's so big, but this is something you could easily see in a book. It's use synthetic division to determine which of the following binomials are factors of 2x squared minus 7x minus 4. And you've got 4 problems, and then you've got divide using synthetic division, and you've got 2 problems. So the first one, here's UEB with Nemeth, and it may look familiar because we used it in the last webinar when we were doing examples. And this one is formatted correctly, I know, because it was taken from the workshop on using the Nemeth Code within UEB context by the National Braille Association that was presented by Dorothy Worthington at the VAVF 2015 conference. So you can see the top, it takes up 3 lines for the directions, and then each problem is on its own line. Then you've got directions on 1 line and question 5 and 6 on the bottom 2 lines. Okay. Then going on to UEB, the top takes the same number of lines. There is maybe a little bit extra, a few extra cells in the problems. And then you've got the directions, but then notice on the bottom it does add 2 extra lines to do the UEB with these particular problems. Okay. Then we also found, it's in your download section. We found examples taken from Braille Code Comparison Part 1 Math and Science Samples of UEB, Nemeth, and NUBS. And it's available at that website. It's by Miss Osterhaus, a presentation she did at the 2012 International AER conference, I believe. But we just grabbed the samples. Now, for those of you that don't know, NUBS is another Braille code that they were working on to try and be able to have one single code for everything. But when the decision ended up coming down, it's UEB and Nemeth, and we're not using NUBS. So just to kind of let you know that that's out there. It was trying to combine Nemeth with UEB. All right, but we're focusing in on just a couple of the examples. We have y equals x over 2. So you see it takes 17 cells in UEB because you need that grade 1 passage indicator and the grade 1 passage terminator. In Nemeth, it takes 10 cells. In the next example, simple factorization. In UEB, it takes 51 cells, and in Nemeth, it takes 29 cells. And one of the things that's stated in this packet was this is a typical 9th grade elementary algebra problem. And one of the things that was brought up with this particular one is like, yeah, well, but there's A's and B's. What if you use other variables? Because, of course, with UEB, if you've got that 9A, you're going to have that grade 1 indicator, otherwise it looks like 91. And so using A's and B's in any letter from A through J would mean adding extra indicators. So on the next slide, we've got the exact same problem. The only thing that's been replaced is A's are replaced with X's and B's are replaced with Y's, so you cut out those grade 1 indicators because they're not needed. And in that case, then UEB decreases from 51 cells to 45 cells. And then our good old quadratic formula. It says example 4 because this is example 4 within that packet. There are other examples in there as well if you wanted to look at it, and then you have a variety of types of math, including some higher level math, which might be interesting for you to look at. But so we've got x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So in UEB, the quadratic formula takes 36 cells. In Nemeth, it takes 24 cells. All right. So moving along, another area was Braille skills. The reading level using literary Braille, whether they're below, at, or above grade level, including comprehension and fluency. The ability to produce and create grade level Braille documents, and the ability to use technology to produce backwards and forwards translated materials, i.e. going from print to Braille, and more importantly, going from Braille to print, because that's where the difficulty has been with most translations. So UEB considerations regarding Braille skills include UEB may be helpful if technology is frequently used for accessibility between print and Braille, because it more closely aligns with print, aiding in electronic translation. And flexibility within UEB guidelines allows more ways to display technical material and may be preferred at certain times where you might want some of that extra flexibility. Then we've got UEB with Nemeth considerations. With more Nemeth materials available, it allows for greater access to a wider variety of materials, and that's going to be especially important right now as UEB is just starting to get rolling in the United States. Written math work may be faster to produce because writing Nemeth requires fewer cells, as we just saw. And Nemeth Code provides for a consistent presentation of Braille material because it has comprehensive and specific guidelines for transcription and formatting of technical materials. And kind of on this last one, I wanted to note, if you have a student that has a very hard time adjusting to changing formats, and I was thinking specifically of a student I worked with once that was on the autistic spectrum, that even subtle changes really threw them off, or possibly a student that might have OCD, then they might be better served with Nemeth that has much more consistent standards. Okay, then the other, and in the other category, they were looking at the ability to transition from activity to activity, so task to task, the level of intrinsic motivation in learning Braille, the level of frustration and anxiety in the current code, and the need for additional time to complete academic tasks. So considerations that were noted in general were students and their parents' attitudes and motivations were important to consider. And I would also add our attitudes are very important to consider.
Right.
How we project and what we think is better or worse can rub off on our students. We want to be very careful with our attitudes and what we are projecting about either code, because it could go either way depending on what you're feeling about the different codes. And then, although it is difficult, motivation, frustration, and anxiety should be carefully examined to determine if the cause is really the Braille code being used, or is it the content of the subject matter being learned? And trying to, I know it's sometimes hard to tease out those differences, but really kind of figure out what really is the source of the frustration and the anxiety. Or maybe it's both, and trying to figure that out. Okay, so other considerations continuing. Those motivated to learn Braille may find it exciting and interesting to learn UEB for math because it's new and global. being used by numerous English-speaking countries around the world. Those motivated to learn Braille may also be motivated to learn UEB with Nemeth Code for math because it is the traditional code that has been maintained in the U.S. and is used by accomplished scientists and mathematicians working in technical fields today. All right, so UEB considerations in the other category. Depending on the ability to transition from activity to activity, task to task, UEB may be helpful since the transition from reading literary to math text would include a transition in conceptual content, but not a transition in codes or symbols. If multiple uses of a single Braille symbol is causing frustration and anxiety, then using UEB for math might be helpful. And if additional time is needed for completion of academic tasks, technology support for UEB in forward and backward translation could help save time. And so that might be a factor, especially for your older students who are needing to get things done quick and get going. Okay, UEB with Nemeth considerations. If transition from activity to activity and task to task is easy, the transition to different symbols may not impact learning of conceptual content, so there may be no reason not to try Nemeth. If there is frustration and anxiety due to the number of cells required to represent math text, or if brailing manually is really difficult for a student for a physical reason or something, then Nemeth may be useful since it uses fewer symbols and is more compact. So, there was also a companion document that was shared that was developed by British Columbia at the UEB Transition Workshop by the Provincial Resource Center for the Visually Impaired. And again, we got this from the Working with the Experts Visually Impaired, UEB with Nemeth in October 2015. And this is a UEB guide for educational teams.
You can find this up in the file pod, and it's called exactly that, I believe.
Yep. UEB Guide for Education.
It's toward the top. Nope, that's the implementation guide. Sorry, UEB Guide for Educational Teams. So you can download that to follow along if you choose. Okay, and so this guide is meant to, the other is kind of a guide to think about ahead of time, and you can bring it to the IP meeting, but this is actually like a list of questions, like a form you would fill out during the meeting, or fill out to share at the meeting. So it contains descriptions of students grouped by age levels, so K through 3, 4th through 8th grade, and 9th through 12th grade. And it's followed by questions. Many of the questions are the same at each grade level to help guide the discussion during an IEP meeting to help toward a decision about Braille instruction, including the choice of UEB or UEB with Nemeth. And so we're going to have examples on the next slides of kind of what this looks like. All right, so for the students grades K through 3, the description is here. It reads, Braille reading students in grades K through 3 will use UEB for all literary materials. UEB mathematics symbols and numbers will be infused in literary materials where they occur in print text. And so questions that they have that you fill out is, describe the student's current level of literacy acquisition. Is the student using Braille for mathematics? Is the student on grade level in mathematics achievement? Will the student benefit from use of UEB for mathematics? Should the student receive instruction in Nemeth Code for mathematics and science notation or math instruction in grades K through 3? Describe the plan for instructing the student in UEB for reading and writing literary text. And describe the plan for instructing the student in mathematics, either UEB or Nemeth. And how much instructional time is required from a qualified teacher of students with visual impairments per week? So those are all the questions for the grade K through 3. Then we get into the next page, the students in grades 4 through 8. Braille reading students in grades 4 through 8 will use UEB for all literary materials. In UEB materials, UEB mathematics symbols and numbers will be infused in literary materials where they occur in print text.
Students in these grades will likely have established skills using EBAE and Nemeth in literary and mathematics materials. So on this one, pretty much all of the questions were exactly the same, except they take out the reference to grades K through 3 on question 5. And then the 9th through 12th, and this is where it varied a little bit. So Braille reading students in grades 9 through 12 may use UEB for literary materials. In UEB materials, UEB mathematics symbols and numbers will be infused in literary materials where they occur in print text. Students in these grades will likely have established skills using EBAE and Nemeth. And questions 1 through 4 are the same as all the other grade levels. And then we get into questions 5, describe the plan for instructing the student in UEB for reading and writing literary text, for understanding UEB text encountered in the future, because these are your students that are almost out the door, but you do want to make sure that they have an awareness of UEB. 6, describe the plan for instructing the student in UEB mathematics symbols, for understanding symbols in UEB text encountered in the future. And then 7 is the same. How much instructional time is required for from a qualified teacher of students with visual impairments per week? And then you really want to make sure with this that, and this was one thing I forget if it was Dr. DAndrea or Dr. Holbrook brought up, you don't want, especially your older students, even the bright ones who could probably figure it out for yourself, you want to systematically teach them the UEB. You don't want them just to figure it out on their own or have them decide when they want to learn it. They do need to have an awareness of it, so when they run into it in the future, they'll know.
Oh yeah, so the homework. So everything that Kathy just went over on that particular form, the UEB guide for educational teams, we're asking you to complete that as your homework on a particular student that you have. If this is not something that you are able to complete, please email us and perhaps we can work out an alternate assignment, but we encourage you to look at it and attempt to fill it out on one of your students. And I said the file is in the file pod for download. There we go.
So that brings us to some of the questions from previous webinars. I wanted to make sure we put these in. What makes this UEB so much better than Nemeth? I think we answered that. UEB isn't better than Nemeth. They're just two different ways of doing the same thing. Second question was, how hard would the transition to UEB from Nemeth be for students in middle and high school? I think that largely depends on the particular students. I can think of 2 high school students I worked with right before I came to FIMC that they'd have no trouble whatsoever. It would be easy. Mm-hmm. I can think of another student that I worked with that it would blow their mind. It would be really tough. Or actually, with that particular student who also had learning issues, learning disabilities, I would probably go towards UEB because it was a struggle and a challenge, and they constantly mixed up the upper numbers with the lower numbers and when to use the upper numbers or lower numbers.
And those are the types of factors that you will be considering as you move forward in trying to make these instructional decisions about your students.
So another question was, what are we supposed to use, UEB or Nemeth? The answer is, at this point, whatever the IEP team decides for that particular student in that particular situation, until we get an established official implementation plan in Florida. Then we follow whatever that implementation plan will say. And then how are we applying this? Last I heard we were keeping Nemeth. Well, we talked a little bit about that this is an evolving thing for the country and for us as a state. The more information we learn, the more we understand things better, and that changes our perspective.
Just look at how much even we sat down, as Kathy had explained, there was a committee that sat down and actually sussed out this whole plan for UEB implementation in Florida, and that changed, our perspectives changed on that within just a year's time. And we're still learning more every day, which we're going to apply to make the best plan possible we can for Florida.
Questions?
No questions.
Okay, no,
Oh,
prepared questions.
oh yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry. I do have prepared questions, but before we get into that, I actually want to let me get out of here. Get back to stop sharing my screen. Let's open up that document real quick if we can. Uh, files. It's not there. Bear with me a second, guys. While I'm looking for this file, does anybody have any questions so far?
Is this surprising? Is this helpful?
Clear or clear as mud or
Oh, good. Yvette, thank you.
We know it's not an easy decision.
Like I said, if I was the TVI, I would want someone just tell me what to do. But that's not where we're at.
Was okay, so I can't pull it up. Urgh. Sorry, guys. 1 second. I'm gonna do a quick Making sure the Word document on the screen. Do that. Hold on. That's good we don't have any questions so far. We're hoping that means that it's pretty clear and helpful.
Thank you, Andrea. She said your presentation is very helpful. Good. We were hoping it would be.
Almost there. Hold on. Here it is. Nemeth Community Factors Community Guide for Educational Teams. Okay, so I'm going to open up the form that we want you to use for your homework. I'm going to share my screen again. Getting there. Okay. There we go. Let me make this a little bigger. So this, as we said, this is available for download in your the file pod. So it goes over everything Kathy said. So if you have a K through 3 student that you want to fill this out on, this is where you would input your information to help with your decision-making process. This helps you, I think, kind of break it down into smaller, easier chunks, and it's easier to share with parents and with IEP teams. And the same things, students in grades 4 through 8, you're just inputting the information in a Word document. Pretty easy. We'd be excited to kind of see what you guys fill out and how you guys fill this out. Because we don't have direct access to students anymore, we're looking to you guys to help us with this and to learn more about how these processes might work and what challenges you guys face. So that's that. I just want to share that real quick. And then I've got some questions for you guys. Let me pull out here. So some of these questions we asked in the very first UEB webinar. UEB Nemeth webinar. So you might see a couple that you've already answered before. I'm not seeing the questions on my screen. Are you guys seeing them?
I'm not seeing anything. It's all blank.
I see it on my iPad, but I don't see it here. This is very odd. Hold on 1 second. Oh, try this again. Okay, no. Don't answer these yet. Hold on. Okay, here we go. All right, so UEB symbols, number 1, only go up to an elementary level of math, true or false. Second question is UEB and UEB math are 2 distinct codes, true or false. Third question is UEB always makes a document 50% longer, true or false. And then I have some open-ended questions. The first one being, after watching this webinar series, what are your thoughts regarding UEB for math? Have your thoughts changed regarding UEB for math? The fourth one, after watching this webinar series, what are your thoughts regarding UEB with Nemeth for math? Have your thoughts changed regarding that subject? And then what do you guys need? What else do you need to know about UEB? How can we plan future trainings to help you guys learn more about UEB?
I think you need to reopen the polls.
Oh, sorry. It doesn't, it says they're open. I'm getting answers.
Okay, maybe it's just mine then.
Can't see the chat box anymore.
I can't either.
I don't want to end it in case you guys are typing. I see I have 8 responses up in the top. I know there were about 10 of you on there, 9 or 10. So thank you for responding. Let us know. I'll give you guys another minute. Interesting. Practice makes perfect. Yes, it does. Give everyone another minute to enter on those open-ended questions because your feedback is important to us to help us provide things that are important to you. Mm-hmm. Okay, disheartened.
And kind of talking to that particular question, or that one of the things, one of the studies did evaluate how much longer UEB would make it. And the big thing that came back from that study, and I didn't get a chance to get into really the nitpicky details of it, but what was cited is that depending on the content and what you were doing, it would either be less in UEB, be the same in UEB, or up to 25% more. Now, obviously, when you're talking about doing a lot of stuff with a lot of variables, especially like the A's and B's and things like that, it is going to be a lot more. But it may not be, depending on everything else around it, it might not be as bad as you're fearing. I don't think it's going to quadruple the size of the book or anything like that.
No, and Kathy and I were discussing earlier that some things won't be longer and other things will be. And also, you have to take into consideration that a lot of this stuff that we talked about today was written before the provisional guidelines for transcribing UEB with Nemeth were written. So I'm sure there's actually space that has not been accounted for when you use UEB with Nemeth or Nemeth with UEB because you have to use those opening and closing indicators. So there's actually space added when you're using Nemeth with UEB as well. We need more training. And whoever, I'm not sure who said not as good as UEB with Nemeth, use this for younger grades. And a lot of people are kind of leaning toward, start with the UEB and go through that with the younger students. And then as they get older and as they look at, is this a really strong student in STEM? Maybe then that's when you would consider going to Nemeth. However, UEB does address those higher level maths.
And I think it was Dr. Holbrook that said that I think I had written down that she said she did not recommend going into Nemeth, that she recommended doing UEB for everything K through 3.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah. And two, you have to keep in mind that your students are going to have to be familiar with UEB maths. It's going to come up, and there are going to be word problems where they don't even get out of UEB to go into Nemeth because it wouldn't make much sense just to put an opening and closing indicator there. So they will have to be familiar with UEB math symbols. Another comment here. I like UEB for math very much. However, it's hard to not think Nemeth if I'm only doing UEB for math. Very hard. I was trying to proofread some of Kathy's problems earlier, and I'm like, wait, that's not a 9. That's a superscript. It's funny. You just really have to retrain your brain. Let's see. So after Nemeth for math, my mind goes around in circles when thinking of UEB with Nemeth, but I'm doing both with my little one because we have our feet in both worlds for now, and that's a very good point. And it sounds like your student is very flexible. And that's another thing. This, if anything, that's going to teach our students some major flexibility. Better than UEB alone. Okay. Again, we don't have data to substantiate one is better than the other, but it depends. It's very student-centered and what works for your student. If a student is in older grades, middle school and high school, this is the way to go. I'll definitely need a lot of practice. Practice makes perfect. Future trainings. Yes, practice is key. Classes to prepare for UEB certification would be great. More practice. More on that some other time. More practice. This is an ongoing learning experience. More trainings. Okay. I think the key here is definitely practice. And as Kathy has stated in other webinars, and as I've reiterated, that it's just the more you do UEB online, do the UEBot, look at other webinars. They're out there. Look at other training modules for UEB. Because the more you just delve in and you hear different perspectives from different people, just the more things start to click. Okay, so everybody, thank you so much for your feedback. I'm going to go ahead and close these out and go back to our presentation. Sorry, there's so many windows I have to go through. Let me close this. Share my screen. Okay. Okay. We're back at the beginning. Just kidding. One second. What time are we at? 3:02. Sorry, hold on. Let me get you sick while I go through these really fast. Actually, it'll probably be faster if we just do this. Talked about the homework. Products. Resources. You guys want to know about resources, right? So, I think that's it. Yep.
And then start your webcam again.
Oh, you're talking. They don't need to see me.
Okay. So some of these resources you'll have seen from the end of the regular UEB webinars, but we wanted to reiterate some of them. And I took this from a presentation done by Dr. Kay Holbrook and Kathy Senft-Graves at the Getting in Touch with Literacy 2015, Building on Patterns in the Transition to UEB. And they were talking about APH products that are being produced in UEB or UEB with Nemeth. And so the Feel and Peel stickers, they have UEB basic math symbols as well as Nemeth basic math symbols. The Joy Player Guide you can download. Building on Patterns Kindergarten and First Grade UEB supplements. The Emergent Literacy, there's the VIPS Home, Power at Your Fingertips, Emergent Literacy, the Parent Infants with Visual Impairment Second Edition Practitioner's Manual, and also the Learning Together booklet and Getting Ready for Preschool kit. The All Aboard, the Sightword Activity Express. Also the Touch, Label, and Learn poster, Human Skeleton, Anterior View, and I remember them mentioning this was the first product created with UEB. Interactive map, US map with talking tactile pen, the color and texture marking mats, match it up frames, large and small sets, tactile graphic line slate, Braille labels, small pin feed labels, the Read Write Mini and Animal Watch VI suite, and then spinner overlays for the light box, the protein synthesis kit, the VIPS Home Series Special Education Your Journey to a Successful IEP, New T, Explorer Bright Ray, guidebooks for any math kit, the tactile compass for math and art, Light Insight, Reflections and Refractions kit, Building on Patterns Pre-Kindergarten, Building on Patterns Second Grade UEB supplements.
And I believe they also just released, I can't remember what book it was for the second grade UEB supplements, but they're continually adding to Building on Patterns the student workbooks in UEB. So these are our references used. And real quick, since we have some time, I wanted to talk a little bit about technology. And I was just at the Assistive Technology Industries Association conference last week with Kathy, and going through the vendor hall, of course, my favorite question to ask is, does your product support UEB? Does your product support UEB? How easy is it to access? And I like to have them show me. And so some of the major players that a lot of you are familiar with, such as like AI Squared, who makes Zoom Text, well, they have a new program that's actually a screen magnification program and a screen reader that supports UEB. It was very difficult and convoluted to find, and I did let them know that. And that's one thing I want to impose upon you, is that if you're using technology and you're finding issues, especially with the UEB translation, let those manufacturers and vendors know so that they can remedy the issue. We're all still learning. One big thing that's really cool that Kathy and I got some hands-on time with was the APH Orion TI-84 Plus talking scientific, or the graphing calculator. This is super cool because you can hook up a Refresh Braille, the Refresh Braille 18, to that device with a cord. It's not wireless, but it provides Nemeth output or UEB output. You have the choice, which is really nice. So you have math under your fingertips while you're using that calculator. I love, love, love that. You can also emboss from that, but if you have questions on that, we can set up a separate time to talk about getting that set up. Dolphin is another company that makes a screen reader and magnification software, and they provide UEB support. Freedom Scientific, of course, they've had UEB as a Braille option for output in their program for a while. HIMS, they have the Braille Sense and a couple other portable note takers and refreshable Braille displays that all have UEB support. And I should mention too that they do have UEB with Nemeth. A lot of these companies recognize that some states are going one way and other states are going another, so they're really providing both options. So that's something to keep in mind as you're making these educational decisions for students and your students in higher grades. Even though they're not going to be possibly getting Braille materials at the college level, they still can use technology to access Braille, and they have that option of either making it UEB with Nemeth or just UEB. Humanware, they provide UEB and UEB with Nemeth with UEB support. iOS, so your Apple products, VoiceOver, the default is UEB. It's already there, it's built in. And all the popular Braille translation software, Tiger Software Suite, sorry, they have UEB translation, grade 1, grade 2, and of course, Duxbury is on the ball. They have it in their 11.2 and 11.3 software, but you always want to use the most current updates. And then Braille 2000, I'm not too sure how version 2 is doing, but I know that the creator of that has been working diligently to ensure that UEB and UEB with Nemeth are an option in his Braille translation software. So any questions, comments, concerns? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Well, let me make sure we've gone references. There's our contact information. So yes, questions. Remember your homework we went over. Go back to normal here. Oh, we only have 5 participants left. Any questions from you guys that have hung in there on this Friday afternoon?
No, well then maybe should we do evaluations?
I guess so. Evaluations it is. All right, guys, thanks for hanging in there with us and for being on our webinars, especially those of you that have been on for every single one of them. We greatly appreciate it. Let me reopen these. If you could please give us an evaluation, we would greatly appreciate your feedback.
It also helps us keep doing these.
Yes. Yeah, and this is data we do collect for the state to justify why we're here doing what we do. All right, got a couple responses.
Okay, that's good. My screen's blank for some reason, but
That's so weird. I hope it's not blank. It's Kathy's seeing a blank. I can see it. I don't know. I've got 3 responses so far. Great. Wonderful. I'm glad that you can take that away. That's weird. That was our goal. All right, 3 it is. See if anybody else pops up. What is one thing you will take from this session? Leave it open. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end these other polls. Yes, definitely. There's definitely flexibility and diversity on how to use UEB. I think it's kind of a nice thing to have a little flexibility.
especially for the younger students.
Absolutely. Or students with learning disabilities, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to close this last one. Excellent. Okay, well, thanks for hanging in there, guys. The closing code is PLAN, P-L-A-N. Glenn has a question. Maybe. Great, Glenn. I'm glad. I'm glad it was informative. All right, awesome, guys. Well, hey, it's Friday. It's 3:12. Thanks again for your time and attention. And again, if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to email Kathy or I, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. If we haven't been to your area of the state yet for Braille Challenge, we hope to see you there. And as always, thanks and happy teaching, happy weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.